Hi everyone, this is Alicia Zari back with another video for Teaching to Empower, Taking Action to Foster Student Agency, Self-Confidence, and Collaboration. We are on Chapter 3, Creating a Physical Environment that Supports Empowerment. And if you're in the course, you may notice that this is our last video, but in the book, this would have come right after Chapter 2, starting with ourselves, and before self-directed learning and positive interdependence. One note to make is, depending on when you're watching this video, this was created in the summer of 2021. I'm from California, so California schools, for the most part, have spent a year mostly in a virtual environment, some in a hybrid or in-person environment, depending on the county or the district, and know that the physical environment constraints right now, based on health guidance of social distancing or what material students can use, may impact the level of control you have over this topic. That said, try to reflect as if you were doing it during a typical school year, or in a way that students don't have some of those spacing or health restrictions. So you can make the most of this chapter. Okay, some key topics will be crafting an inclusive design, understanding classroom design as a balancing act, designing to support collaboration, promoting agency and initiative, promoting respect for diversity, and creating a learning studio targeted for mutual empowerment. When we think of inclusive design, a lot of people go to architecture or civil engineering. A common example with universal design, or if you've done any work with UDL, Universal Design for Learning, are the idea of curb cuts. Most curbs prior to curb cuts had a drop off. You'd have to step up or step down. But for accessibility purposes, people that needed this really benefit, but it also benefits a group that may not need it, but would like it. For example, the use of strollers or scooters and skateboards and bikes. So it's not just for people with wheelchairs, but it also allows for more inclusive design for all. Similarly, I strongly recommend either reading the book and or watching the TED Talks from Ted Rose around the end of average. He talks about how one size does not fit all, and often we try to make one size to fit the average, and really that average doesn't exist. There is no person that fits it. So it actually doesn't even benefit some, it benefits none. Similarly, in our classrooms, our students grow and change throughout the year. So just the way we would have a baby in a crib, and over time they might outgrow that crib and move into a bed, our students will also change both physically and social emotionally throughout the year. And part of inclusive design is allowing them to be part of that process as co-creators. Design as a balancing act. If you've looked at design and architecture, even in history outside of education, you know that there are fads and changes that are implemented in design. So for example, if you looked at the Victorian period and you've ever done a tour of the Winchester Mystery House or Victorian style homes, you'll notice that everything's compartmentalized. There's a little room for this, there's a little room for that, a lot of closed off spaces. Versus modern day, there's a large fad for open design, the open layout. It has its own pros and cons. Maybe there's connection and a lot of space, but now with such an open space, it's a lot harder for heating or air conditioning. Maybe there's too much noise level, and we're seeing this shift not only in our homes, but the design of workplaces, as well as the design of classrooms. So just as architecture outside of the classroom has its pros and cons based on the values, architecture inside the classroom has its own historical timeline. At one point, the values might have been efficiency or standardization or maximization. How many students can fit in here? And then a new wave of research came out. And so it became how much natural light can we get into the classroom? What are the acoustics or the sound? How can we foster strong air quality? Too often, though, our buildings and our spaces don't update as quickly as our philosophies. So you may be in a classroom that was not designed in modern day values and philosophy, but something of a generation or two before. So while we often tell students to think outside the box, the reality of being creative designers is actually thinking inside the box. How do we work within those constraints to still align with our values and make our learning spaces functional? If you do a simple search of classroom design on Google Images, you'll find these idealistic spaces, flexible seating, comfort, bright light, colors, and maybe you're fortunate enough to have that type of ownership over your classroom. More realistically, you might be thinking about how to work within the constraints that you have. For example, in a college classroom, how do I use the tables and desks already available? Maybe you might have flexible seating where it can be turned into groups versus turned individually. You'll see often new classroom designs where individual desks or tables can also be put together in pods to create collaborative workspaces or different designs. Whether you have control over that or not, think about what your ideal would be and how to work within the constraints of what you have available to you. And again, I suggest this video, Think Inside the Box, The Power of Creative Constraint by John Spencer. Next, in our classrooms, we're going to talk about promoting agency and initiative. As we know, there's a vast difference when you walk into a room and you feel like it is cold and not welcoming, versus when you walk in and your comfort level goes up and you think, I belong here. Think about that space as it is for you. Oftentimes when we think about belonging, we turn to things like classroom displays or bulletin boards. How can I display student work? How can I have them be a part of the walls? Or how can I have the classroom library reflect the students in my community? But oftentimes we don't think about agency and initiative and ownership a step beyond. If you haven't heard of this story, I strongly recommend that you read some articles about Japanese classrooms. A few years ago, I was informed that there were articles about Japanese classrooms don't have janitors because students are a part of that. Students have jobs, and at the end of each day, they are responsible for cleaning the classroom, cleaning the common spaces, including the toilets and the bathrooms. But that by having that shared responsibility, they had ownership of their space and saw that creating a space was keeping a space clean was benefiting not only themselves, but the school community. Similarly, I might have shared this before, but I went to a school one time in Berkeley. It was not in a traditional classroom style structure. It was a private school, but there were no desks. And I asked, what were they going to do? School was going to start in a few weeks. And the instructor said, well, we actually don't have any desks because that's the first project that students do in this middle school, is they have to design and create their desk in the wood shop so that they have a place to sit. And I just thought about how often do our classrooms give students ownership and students responsibility? We sometimes say we foster community, but we do that in the first few weeks and then race to the academics. What skills are these students getting that will benefit them not only all year, but during their lifetime? Take a moment to read this slide and think about how these design options relate to you. Feel free to pause the video at this time. On that note of how we value importance of those things, reflect on these key questions. How can the design that a teacher creates or co-creates with students encourage or discourage each student's learning efforts? How do classroom displays draw students' attention to what is essential to learn? How much involvement and creative decision-making authority do students have in what is displayed on the walls and elsewhere? Again, getting into that learning studio. How easy is it for all students to see these displays from their sight lines? One thing I always did in my classroom the day before school started was I actually pulled out the chairs and sat in each student's seat. Obviously, I'm an adult. I'm 5'8" inches tall. My students were 10 and 11, so our height difference would be a little bit different. But I wanted to see, what does it look like from their view? Can they see the screen from where they're sitting? Can they pull out their chair comfortably without hitting the person behind them? Are there areas to flow? Are the walkways available for students to see and feel comfortable in that space? And if not, do I have a place for them to be able to voice that and advocate for their needs so that we can foster the best learning possible? How do the decor and images displayed on the walls reflect the makeup of the members of the classroom community? And does the classroom have an appropriate degree of sensory stimulation to encourage calm, concentration, learning, and a sense of well-being? I've been in a lot of wonderfully Pinterest-inspired classrooms that look beautiful in photo, but I can tell you, it didn't foster a sense of calm. There was so much overstimulation of materials on the wall, things hanging, things blowing with the air conditioning on, that it actually negatively affected my concentration. So think about how we can find that appropriate degree of sensory stimulation for our students. As we think about this as a learning studio, consider taking a design thinking approach. Again, like I said, with sitting in the students' seats, empathize. What is it like to be in their shoes? Ask them, what do you like in a classroom? What helps you focus? If you could choose where to sit to do your work, where would you choose? With others? In the corner? Outside? Empathize. And then as you define what it is you're looking to create, that's where you get to ideate within the constraints, prototype, test it out, and continue this design cycle using their input. I'd like to leave you with one last story. When it comes to designing learning classrooms and student agency and initiative, I think about this story about my math manipulatives in my classroom. In my last classroom, I was very fortunate to have a whiteboard where it had storage behind. I know not everybody has that privilege. I worked in a portable for many, many years that had zero built-in storage. That said, I would pull out the manipulatives we would need for each unit. If we're doing place value, the base 10 blocks would probably have a permanent place on the classroom shelves, easily accessible for those lessons. When we're doing fractions, fraction tiles, and pattern blocks were easily available during those weeks of our fractions unit. But I couldn't keep every manipulative out the whole year. So I had my teacher space, and the students knew that that's where I pulled them out from. But most likely this whiteboard space was sort of the teacher zone, my personal closet and cabinet. At the end of the year, I had a student who was taking a math test. During a math test, students are usually quiet. They're sitting by themselves. If they have a question, they raise their hand. And he got up and started walking towards the front of the classroom. And my first instinct was to stop and go, "Why are you out of your seat? We're taking a test." But then I sat back and observed. He went right up to the whiteboard, opened it up, grabbed the manipulatives he needed to be able to show his thinking, and took the appropriate amount he wanted back to his seat. Isn't that what we want for our students? To be able to self-advocate, to know when they need a resource, to know when to research, without needing us as teachers to guide them and force feed them or give them exactly what they need when they need it. That's empowerment to me. So even though we may not know what back to school will look like and what restrictions may impede our ideal layout of our classroom, we can know that the best way to prepare students for the future is by empowering them in the present. How do we give them the space in our physical classroom to be empowered, to feel comfortable, and to feel like they belong? Thank you so much for watching. This is the final video of Teaching to Empower. I hope you've enjoyed reading, and if you would like to learn more, definitely check out the book for yourself. Thank you.